one.
And we're a go. Dateline. San Francisco, a hotbed of robo taxis. Welcome to the Daily Objective, the weekly collective edition. And we're talking robo taxis. There are already autonomous vehicles in major cities in the United States, and San Francisco's been testing out robot taxis, autonomous vehicles. Outstanding technology, safer than you or I. I don't know, I'm a pretty good driver. Safer than most of us behind the wheel. You would think that's a good thing. Well, we got to talk about this. I have the pleasure, the honor of talking to Nicolas Krusek. Nicolas, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, Robert.
Excellent. And Mark Pellegrino is on the line.
And I'd be doing a lot better if I was a vehicle.
Yes, if you weren't having to drive this thing yourself. And Jacqueline has made it. Jacqueline is on the line. You're both traveling today. You are both on the road. Jacqueline, how are you doing today?
I am good. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah.
You sound good. And how
Awesome.
great would it be?
I'm at the airport.
See, you're on the road. How great would it be if you were not behind the wheel, but in a comfortable seat in an autonomous vehicle? But here's the story real quick. It's not all that unsurprising that one of the nation's top tech targets has become the go-to testing grounds for autonomous cars. Over time, however, it has proven to be a bit difficult for locals to cope with the unpredictable nature of these fleets. Some have chosen an unorthodox method to rebel against these driverless vehicles. A group going by the name Safe Street Rebel. Yeah, I want to trust my future tech to a group called Safe Street Rebel, is fed up with what they perceive to be driverless nuisances. Members have verbally protested against services like Cruise and Waymo, companies operating in San Francisco. Here's the bottom line. These quote unquote rebels have gone on Twitter and organized this protest where you've got these driverless taxis all over San Francisco, and they're stopping them. What they're doing is, and they're sharing this on Twitter. Here's what you do: find a traffic cone. And they don't mention that if you take a traffic cone off of some area where it's needed, you might be causing another accident. But take a traffic cone, stick it on the hood of one of these robo taxis, and that disables it, shuts them down until somebody drives by and fixes it. It seems pretty straightforward, but Mark, you mentioned the word Luddites, and that sounds exactly right. Mark, what do you think of this?
Well, what exactly kinds of hazard are the autonomous vehicles presenting to these people to make them act in such a fashion? Is there evidence that these things are causing accidents or problems for people?
There have been some minor accidents, and there was one fatality, which there's going to be if you run the records of these vehicles against the aggregate of drivers. These are much, much safer and less likely to cause an accident. But yeah, we all knew at some point somebody's going to get killed by one of these because that's what happens on the road. And that's what they're pointing to. Well, maybe more people get killed by real drivers, but it's not robots out there killing us all. So yeah, there are some issues. Much safer than regular human drivers, though.
Yeah, well, like every technology has both its good and its bad, and you have to work out these kinks somehow. There's a time when you've been flying in an airplane when the pilot is landing and taking off for the very first time. You may not know it, but that's the way we progress in society. So I say we forge on ahead, irrespective of what these people are doing, and keep on going with the autonomous vehicles. You can get so much more done when the computer is doing the driving for you.
I actually I wrote an article.
Go ahead, Jack.
A couple of years ago, I wrote an article about autonomous vehicles, and I did a whole bunch of research on it and wrote about it in terms of like smart community stuff. And I think my intro to that was that vision of David Hasselhoff in Knight Rider just sleeping in his car because his car was driving itself. But I think that fatality that you mentioned, Robert, that if I recall, that was one that was in, I think it was Arizona, unless there's been another one. And interestingly, the reason for that fatality was that there was an autonomous braking feature that had been disabled, that prevented the vehicle from doing what it was designed to do. So I'm with Mark. The people in San Francisco, which is no surprise, are complete Luddites. They'll go and watch, movies like Avatar and all kinds of like cool futuristic stuff, but no, they don't want it in their backyard. And I find it ridiculous. And in fact, in the article I think that Daniel had sent out, they were just talking about, some of the stupid things that these autonomous cars have done. I have my own stupid story of what I did with a traffic cone when I was picking up Mark the other day for lunch with his two cute little puppies. And as I was waiting, I was directed to the side of the hotel where there were a bunch of cones. Actually, I'm going to show you, much like these cones here. Can you guys see those? Yeah. Yeah. So there were a bunch of cones. And so I'm like, well, it doesn't really look like a place to park. But they're like, yeah, just go over, park by the cones. So I go and I park by the cones, and then Mark comes in and I completely forget that I'm by the cones, and I like drive away, and then you just hear this thump, 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 thump. And Mark's like, what's that? And I'm like, I think it's a traffic cone that I just ran over. So stupid humans make stupid mistakes as well. It's not just the AVs.
I hate to tell you, Jax, that was not a cone. That was the ballet.
Well, we got away with it clean, didn't we?
See, an autonomous vehicle probably wouldn't have made that mistake. Nicholas, any thoughts on the robo taxis and what this group here, Safe Street Rebel, is doing about it?
Well, a few things, Robert. First of all, I'm probably not as good a driver as you are. I haven't had any fatalities yet, but I've had my share of accidents. So that's my confession there. I welcome autonomous vehicles. The sooner we have them here in Canada, the better. And so if these Safe Street Rebels are really committed to safe streets, why aren't they trying to ban all cars? Because clearly, in the aggregate, it would seem that these autonomous vehicles are safer than a lot of human-driven vehicles. So why is this group targeting specifically the self-driving cars? Why aren't they trying to get all cars off the road if they're going to be consistent in applying their premises? But I see this as a symptom of a larger malaise that seems to be afflicting society, which is here's a small group of people who aren't getting their way. And so they feel the need to disregard individual rights, disregard private property rights. This is really no different than the environmental activists who are defacing works of art, or native activists who are trying to block the construction of pipelines or blocking traffic. And I think it ties in with the discussion that Mark and Nikos had a couple of days ago about that incident of that crazy woman who disrupted the wedding of one of the conservative British members of parliament. These people simply have no respect for other people's rights and freedoms. And the question is, what do we do about it? What do we do when we have these people who don't respect private property, don't respect rule of law? Ideally, this is where the authorities, where the police should be able to step in and, where appropriate, issue heavy fines or jail sentences where appropriate, but it's not happening. In fact, the legal system seems to be going in the opposite direction. We've had all these cases where people can't even pursue shoplifters or can't even charge shoplifters with the crime. The whole system is going in the opposite direction. And one of my fears is that eventually this will lead to vigilante justice, that people are gradually getting fed up with all of these assaults on our rights and freedoms. And sooner or later, people are going to start taking the law into their own hands. There was that incident, those the stabbing incidents on the subways. There was some discussion of that on Monday. I see that happening more and more, that there's going to be more vigilante justice, more frustrated citizens who see that the police are not doing their jobs, the justice system is not doing their jobs, and sooner or later it's going to lead to violence. And I think that's terribly unfortunate.
I certainly see some of that. I have to say, since you mentioned it, this group is calling out these vehicles in a way that makes it clear they don't want anybody driving. They're calling out the emissions associated with manufacturing the electric batteries. Well, of course, that's going to apply to electric vehicles, whether they're driven by people or by robots. particulate emissions from each car due to their tires. Your tires are emitting little bits of rubber as you're driving. So obviously, you're right. They shouldn't just be against robotic cars, and they aren't. They're against all. These are, in Mark's words, true Luddites we're talking about. Now, people who are not Luddites, people who are rational, and we can count on our super chatters. I've got to say thank you to Buster Jones, who is in with a super chat and says, first stop robotic taxis, next stop robotic pilots. Well, what would we call that? Maybe an autopilot. Yeah, we're getting there. Well, takeoff and landing, of course, aren't there yet. But yes, absolutely. Give me those robotic pilots as well. Mary Aline is in with the super chat as well. Thank you for that. She also has a super chat comment. Morality requires choice and freedom. Mary Aline, you're absolutely right, of course. And finally, one more from adherent of Lady Columbia. In 20 to 20 years, might have been meant 10 to 20 years or 20 to 40 years, at some point, anyway, in 20 to 20 years, as the tech becomes more refined, well, they will argue, well, the computer is better. Why should you be able to drive yourself anymore? In terms of safety statistics, and Jacqueline, from your research even better than I do, the vehicles are already safer than us. And I'm sure there are some people who are already ready to jump on, well, if they are safer, we shouldn't let people drive anymore. I can totally see that coming.
Yeah, it's interesting because cars that we have today that we drive. So I'm not talking about like Teslas yet, but the cars that we have today have an infinite number of safety features, including park assist. You get your backup warning, your proximity warnings. And those are all clear advancements from what cars used to be like in the 50s. And so it's just a natural progression that when we go the way of autonomous now, as compared to let's say that like your typical fuel injected car has like maybe let's say 50 sensors on it somewhere on the outside. These autonomous cars, like the ones that they are talking about in San Francisco, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of LiDAR, radar sensors at every touch point at the car. They're so much more. They're so much safer. And I kind of think that the way that the world is going to go is, I don't think that people are ever going to give up being able to drive their own car. But I do think that it will probably turn into something like when you want to go on a horseback ride. Like when you want to get back to, the earth of riding around on a horse, like the way that we did it before we had cars. I think that, there will be like we have dude ranches for horses. There'll probably be like driving ranges where you can go crazy. But I do think that's the way that the world is going, and to fight it based on the technology aspect alone is, it's short-sighted, but it's also destructive and nihilistic. I think that these people, they want to remove every aspect of technology and bring us back to Stone Age days, where we're not emitting anything, right, except for maybe a volcano that destroys the atmosphere. But yeah, that's my rant.
Couldn't agree more. Their complaint isn't just about autonomous vehicles, but about passenger cars in general, because they're individual. The group champions public transport as well as bicycles and walking, but cars are individual and therefore they're bad. Public transport groups, that's good. And, the emissions, so that's bad. And worst of all, for-profit companies, well, they're obviously going to slaughter people left and right because all they care about is the bottom line. So that's obviously corrupting as well.
Robert, what they really hate and what they're really rebelling against is independence. They despise that. They fear it, but they mask their fear in an ideology of fighting for a virtue for what they think is the common good. But they hate independence. Let's just say it.
Yeah, I think that's clear both in the hatred of, again, the individual automobile versus public transport, and the technology, these products of rational minds, these computer-driven vehicles that are safer than what any of them could do behind the wheel if they know how to drive a car. I have to agree with that.
And here's a related question. I'll throw this out for the collective to chew on. How long do you think it'll be before taxi drivers associations and bus driver associations or unions start complaining that driverless vehicles are putting drivers out of jobs? I mean, we've seen this over the past couple of years with Uber. A lot of taxi drivers have taken up arms on the grounds that Uber is taking away business from them, from the taxi driving companies. And if driverless vehicles become more common, whether it's taxis, buses, or whatever, sooner or later, people are going to complain, they're taking our jobs. How many years do you think it'll be before we start to see that?
Not years at all. It should be rather immediate. I have to say, I was in Paris when the taxi drivers openly rebelled against the Uber drivers and locked down the entire city of Paris for a couple of days, burning tires, overturning cars, being general hooligans. So this should be a phenomenon that we'll see very, very, very soon. I mean, when you think about it too, these things end up taking over the taxi world. Those poor suckers in New York who have to pay what, $250,000 for a taxi medallion. I mean, these people have a real interest at stake. It's not just moving a job, but an investment that the government forces them to make that they have to pay off. So their lives are really in jeopardy when the technology advances them out of the job market.
Truth. Absolutely right. Now, I would offer an optimistic perspective on this, but I'm going to hold that back. First of all, I want to address a few more super chats. Catherine, thank you very much for that. She says, I welcome self-driving cars. Absolutely, and I do too. Mary Aline is in with a member super chat. This is great. Every month you can put, if you're a member on the YouTube channel, you can put in a super chat that comes with the subscription. So by all means, please consider joining our YouTube membership. Of course, you can also be a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. The link for that is right at the top of the chat. Click it and you know what to do. And Mary Aline says with her member super chat here, I have a 2011 RAV4 with no bells and whistles. I love to drive, mostly. I've only had one accident in 1992. Yeah, I have a newer and an older vehicle. The older one doesn't have the proximity sensors or parking assist or any of that. Just a little camera I added to the back. And you're right, Jacqueline, I love that, I drive the newer car or rent a brand new car. And it's like, I didn't even know some of this technology existed. And all of a sudden, and it's all intuitive. It's all easy. It does all the work for you. How could anybody be against tech? How could they be against any of this? Also, one more super chat from Catherine. She says, people always seem, lost my mouse there. People always seem afraid of new technology. Well, absolutely. And there are really vile and vicious reasons for that. And then there are some reasons that are more just lack of familiarity, and you're more willing to accept risks you've already taken on than newer risks, even if they're smaller. It's not all nihilistic, but some of it really is.
Yeah, I feel like most.
Go ahead.
I feel like most of the world looks at human beings as categorizes human beings in one of two ways, as either sinners or animals, either driven by animal instinct or by base sin nature. Objectivists are the outliers in our maintaining that human beings are rational animals and looking at the brighter side of life. So we see technology as a boon, as a way of improving our world around us. Other people see it as a threat because bad, sinful, animal nature human beings are going to be commanding this technology, and lots of things can and will go wrong.
Yes, Jacqueline, you were going to say?
No, I agree. I agree with Mark on that, and kind of back to the point of the people that are afraid of it. I think that there's two kinds of people that are afraid of it. There are the people like my Aunt Rosie, who is afraid of it because she doesn't understand it that well, and thinks I was the one who gave her the internet when I downloaded Chrome on her computer, but who's grateful for it, and who, it's difficult for them, like the older, I mean, there's things that I have to have my daughter do, and I'm a real technical person. And, and she's like on social media, she just knows everything. And, that's just the way of the world. So I understand people getting older, especially, people who have been in a job like a taxi driver for 20, 30 years, and then having to adapt to a new technology. I want to be empathetic toward that. But at the same time, all of this goes toward an increased quality in life. And the people that are afraid of it, but come along anyway, they understand that because they want an increased quality of life. The people that are afraid of it and hate it and want to destroy it are the people who actually don't want a good quality of life. If they did, they would change their minds about it. But these are nihilistic people that want to see, they're like the crabs in the crab bucket. They just want to pull everybody else down with them because they don't want to get out themselves.
Yes. Another super chat. Ashley Shrugged says, ready? Wake up in my car at a distant destination. Yeah, I'm ready for that too. I am ready for taking that nap. Jonathan Honig is also in with a super sticker. Jonathan, thank you very much for your support and for being an outstanding host on the ARC UK. Appreciate the support. Please keep those super chats coming. They all go to support the work of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Do we have any more thoughts on this before I shift gears, but only a little bit, because I told you I had a more optimistic perspective to offer. Any more thoughts on the autonomous taxis, the robo taxis, and these clowns turning them into dunce cars by putting a cone on their head? I think we've got that covered. Good, because second story, you'll say this is an entirely different story, but to me, it's the same story. Today, in the United States of America, hopefully coming around the world, FDA approves first non-prescription daily oral contraceptive. Today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved Opill, a tablet for non-prescription use to prevent pregnancy. This is the pill. This is an over-the-counter birth control pill, and it was just approved today. Today's approval marks the first time a non-prescription daily oral contraceptive will be an available option for millions of people in the United States. This is from the the Food and Drug Administration. Harry Binswanger has a much better acronym for that. They really are the Federal Death Administration. Everything that they have said no to, everything that they have stood in the way of. But we are seeing prescription drugs come off prescription. Those of us who take Claritin every day forget that you used to have to go to a doctor to get that stuff. Well, now it's hitting birth control pills. And to me, what's amazing about that, and I want to hear what you all think, is it is allowing in one little tiny area some degree of autonomy. And that means responsibility, because if you take this stuff and your body goes crazy, you've got to be the one to say, oh, yeah, I better change things up. So I would love to hear, what do we think of the FDA finally approving oral birth control pills over the counter?
Well, it's great news, but here's a question. How much sooner could we have had this if it weren't for the Federal Death Administration? And how many other wonderful drugs or technologies or medical treatments could we have if it weren't for the need for the FDA approval? I mean, frankly, the FDA is an organization that shouldn't even exist. I mean, we shouldn't have to require their approval or disapproval for anything. And actually, there's a very good article on this subject by Keith Lockitch, which Daniel, maybe if you can find it and post it in the chat later on. It's an article that appeared in the New Ideal some years ago on the subject of the FDA and the terrible death and destruction that they've caused over the years.
Yeah, I sort of have a personal story with respect to this, because the FDA kept beta blockers out of the United States for probably a decade while they were in full use in Europe. And I often have wondered at the number of people who died from atrial fibrillation or associated issues that stem from atrial fibrillation, like stroke, for example, because they couldn't get these beta blockers to slow their heart down. Now, as you guys might know, I'm not sure if you do, I had that very same heart issue, and beta blockers, saved me for about 6 years before I was able to get the surgery. So they are a dreadful, dreadful agency. They do need to go. And I'm glad that women now have more liberty, more autonomy now, because that's exactly what this is providing them. But, you know, people don't like liberty anymore. It's not very popular.
Well, and that raises another question. Is there any danger, and I'd like to know more about what the situation is in the United States now. Is there any danger that the present conservative Supreme Court might start clamping down on birth control? Has anyone heard anything about that?
I haven't, but I don't think that they would consider that their purview. What do you think, Robert and Jax?
Yeah, the trend has been the opposite, other than the disastrous repeal of Roe versus Wade. This court has been surprisingly good, and we've had a few good episodes on that with James Valiant and others speaking about it. So it's a great question, but I don't think that that's a real risk given the direction the court is moving. You're right; they seem to be anti-sex, anti-pleasure, but I don't think this is going to fall, as Mark said. I don't think it's going to fall within what they're doing right now. Roe versus Wade, unfortunately, was on shaky ground, but most of the rest of what they've done, the recent pullbacks, for example, on affirmative action, I've been pretty happy with it. Jacqueline, do you have another thought on that?
I don't think we're in as much danger from the Supreme Court on this, because I think that they, even though Roe v. Wade, I think was a badly drawn up ruling in the first place, that should have fallen under, a woman's right should fall under private property, I think. But I believe that instead it was under privacy. And as unfortunately Clarence Thomas pointed out, and everybody, wanted to nail him to the cross for this, but he rightfully pointed out that with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, because of it being under privacy, it opens up other things that were protected, and birth control could fall under that. I think we're at a higher risk of states banning it, especially the states that, were the first ones to get rid of abortion the second that they had the opportunity to. Unfortunately, Texas. But I do want to say, I mean, it's about damn time that the pill got approved. I believe it's already approved for over the counter in European countries everywhere. Maybe Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, because he's got more experience there. But
what do you say?
Sorry, the implications of that were
impregnating people everywhere, Mark. That's what I mean. No, because you've been living there. Sorry, my bad. I do not want to start rumors here by that, but and sorry, there's going to be some background noise here, but on the other hand too, the thing I really can't stand about the federal death agency is that it's tied to insurance. So you can't get a drug covered under insurance unless it is approved by the FDA. And an example of this is for men at any age, or generally older, can get testosterone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy. Women can get hormone replacement therapy too, although in the last 10 years, they've found that women getting older, reaching menopause, benefit greatly from testosterone replacement therapy. But they have to pay for it completely out of their pockets because the FDA has not approved it for women, even though all the research demonstrates that it's perfectly safe. It's in fact beneficial. And this kind of thing drives me crazy because, then we're basically having to subsidize the insurance companies, right, by paying for these drugs out of pocket. And some of these drugs, like Mark was saying, you couldn't even get. And I think the FDA serves no purpose except for bureaucratic, sorry, there's some announcements going on. But anyhow, I'll stop it there because this thing might go on for a while.
Yeah, well, can't disagree with any of that. I want to get a couple of these super chats in because we've got people have been great in the chat here. Mary Aline is in for $5 more and says, "Don't be afraid of learning new things." She's going back to our technology discussion. That means you are getting old regardless of your age. if you're afraid of learning new things. I have to watch myself on that, she says, and I know that feeling too. Occasionally I have that get off my lawn feeling. Catherine says, how soon before states start banning it? So apropos of what you were saying, Jacqueline, federal government may say, okay, states can say, well, we'll see about that. Mary Aline says, on the FDA, too little, too late as usual. Yes, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. And Buster Jones says the FDA is as detrimental to man's mind as was the hesitation to nuclear power. Funny how in both cases, socialists had to go and ruin the ride, unquote, Buster Jones. I just watched, incidentally, because we discussed it previously, the Oliver Stone Nuclear Now. And as we expected, and as some people have already said, it's great on nuclear. It's great on the future. But why is everything framed as it, and it's important because of climate change. If climate change was entirely a myth, and in many ways it is, although, even Alex Epstein says, well, there may be some of that going on. But even if it was completely a myth, the need for nuclear, the film points out there are real risks in using coal, especially so-called dirty coal. So yes, we do need that now. Thank you for that super chat, Buster Jones. I totally get this idea too, that the FDA, it's like I'm in a prison cell, I'm getting beaten 3 times a day, and they've decided that the first beating of the day will include a few less lashes. That's where we're at when they say, yeah, you can have over-the-counter birth control. I still can't help but celebrate it, not just for what it is itself, but the idea that, well, somebody sees we need to give people more freedom. Now, I don't take birth controls. I don't need birth controls. I don't smoke marijuana. I don't need marijuana. I do take Claritin, but the point is one item after, small, I know, tiny little bits, but one item after another, somebody out there is saying, yeah, we got to legalize this. Yeah, we got to get the government off of our back on this one little thing. And I will take one little victory, to steal a line from Rush, anytime I can, if it's going to make people think twice about, well, maybe there are other things.
What do you guys, Robert, did you in your research of this, did you note whether there were any age restrictions on buying the birth control? Could a 12-year-old go in and start buying it? Is there
that's
any
a
kind of
great
parental
question.
consent required?
Not know. I've got the FDA statement in front of me, but I don't see any mention of age.
Because what do you guys think about that in general? Like, because me as a mother, right, I would want to know if my 8 or 9-year-old daughter decided to go to the drugstore and start taking birth control.
Absolutely. As long as the kid is living under your roof and you are responsible for their welfare and their future, that has to be the case.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if they have some guidelines on that, because there are I can't even buy Sudafed, right, without showing my ID, because they're afraid I'm going to start making crystal meth with it. But Mark, you were saying that there are no age restrictions. I do think that there should be. I think that that minors should have parental consent, or there should be a discussion with the parents prior to being able to purchase that.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's nothing in their press release about age at all. And maybe that'll be one of those restrictions that the states will add on to this. But yeah, that'll be something to watch out for. Of course, when I was young, if you were underage, there was no law against buying birth control, but the pharmacist sure would look at you funny if you were under 18. Sometimes I wonder if we could go back to the old days when people just used their own best judgment for these things, including whether or not they were going to sell to kids. But
yeah, when you're talking about like condoms and stuff, right? You're not talking about like actual birth or like birth control pills.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question, though. Yeah, how is that going to be handled? Again, it's not in the press release, but there's the longer version of this that I can look into, and we'll see if maybe do an update a little bit later if there are. And again,
Mark just researched it, and I guess that there's
Okay.
no age restrictions, which
okay.
I do kind of have a problem with that, and not to, I don't want to change the subject drastically, but it is sort of related. Here in California, there's a bill that is just about to pass. It might already be incorporated in the family code, which is that if a parent can actually be guilty of child abuse if they do not affirm the gender of their child at any age whatsoever. It's actually in the, like, now the family judges actually have to factor that into deciding custody and support, which I just,
Oh my God.
yeah, it's hideous.
Oh my God.
Yes. No,
So I
Just goes to show you, it doesn't take a majority to change the world. We have a small cabal of really, virulent anti-intellectuals pushing this agenda, and they have succeeded in establishing it all over the place. It's now institutionalized. It's insane.
yeah, it's a complete separation. I feel like it's really harkens back to communism, where you're no longer responsible for your own offspring. You're responsible for everybody else. And not only are you no longer responsible for them, but you no longer have any agency over your own children. And this is why I was asking that question about the birth control, is because I do feel like agency is being taken away from parents of minor children. And it's a dangerous thing, because what's going to start happening soon, I think, generation after generation, is parents are not going to be able to parent anymore, and they're not going to know how to do it anymore. They're simply going to let the state raise their children.
It's almost, that's the intention.
Do you think that does that reasoning apply to other medications though? Should there be other medications that don't require a prescription and that your children shouldn't be able to buy? Or do you think it's primarily this one you're concerned about because of the behavior associated with it?
I'm not as concerned about the behavior associated with it. I do think, it's a parent's job to know what their child is up to. There are many valid reasons for taking birth control. My daughter started on it early because, she had really, I'm sorry if she doesn't watch this podcast, she doesn't care, but she had really, bad periods and cramps, and the pill really helped her. So there's lots of valid reasons, but you're introducing a hormone that's changing the chemical structure of your body. So I'm trying to think of, other drugs that, over-the-counter drugs. I can't think of them, like, off the top of my head that are like changing the chemical structure in your body on a permanent basis. If you guys can think of any, I'm all ears.
And by the way, is the age restriction, is that something that might vary from one state to another? Because, for example, in Canada, different provinces have a different age of majority or age of consent. So is that something, perhaps that's the reason why this wasn't in the FDA press release. Maybe it's something that different states would have different laws about what age you need parental consent in order to buy this particular.
It remains to be defined for this issue, but we see that all over the country. The age of majority is different in different states, and what one can do before and after the age of majority is very different across the country. So yeah, that is very likely to be a state's issue. Real quick, because we are talking about taking on personal responsibility for this, Ashley Shrugged is in with another super chat and reminds us, she says, ladies, please be careful if you smoke or have blood clots, but I'm ridiculously pleased about this. Bring on the male pill too. Yeah. What's up with that? Of course, then we have to be sure whether we're really male or female, and that gets into a whole different can of worms there.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right to smack me down in thinking that this is a cause for optimism, and yet I can't help but think, well, it's a good thing in a bad situation. Any little bits of personal responsibility that we get back, even if they do kind of highlight how little of that we've got, has got to be a good thing. and not a reason to do any less fighting for liberty than we already do. One little victory, though.
Amen.
Well,
And
outstanding.
I wouldn't say we're smacking you down, Robert. I mean, I am positive about it. You know, like I said, it is about time. That it's about damn time that these, you know, federal regulation agencies just get out of the way and let the world work as it can and should work in a free market where people are responsible, and if they make irresponsible choices, they pay the consequences and ideally learn from them or not. And that's the way that it should be. You know, it's like I would hate it if it, but I do feel like we're going more toward like the nanny state, especially with some of these family law regulations.
Yes. And the
But I don't
earlier
want to end
discussions.
negative.
Yeah, the earlier discussions about the gender wars were great. The Ayn Rand Institute as well has had some great podcasts on that. Take a look at their recent shows if you've missed any of those. Earlier, you had Nikos talking with Ankar Gate about the what is a woman, Matt Walsh wants to know. Well, that's feeding right into the worst possible allies we could have in that fight. In other words, the Daily Wire type right wing. So yes, plenty more information there as well. I'll take my victories where I can get them. Any more thoughts we have from the panel on either the autonomous vehicles or our autonomous right to choose our birth control?
Well, I would like to humbly suggest that we should do a whole episode on the topic that Jax brought up a minute ago about parents being forced to affirm the genders of their children. I think that's something we could have quite an interesting discussion about.
I think you're right. It's beyond an outrage. It's hard to even be rational when hearing something that outrageous.
And I would
Yeah,
just say
I'd be
whatever
ahead,
makes
Mark.
us more autonomous is good. Independence is good.
Yes. Excellent. An
Yeah.
outstanding discussion. I really appreciate talking about this because again, the idea of personal responsibility and getting even the smallest bits of that back, that hits close to home for me. I'm sure it does for all of us because we respect the virtue of independence and the sovereignty of the individual rational mind, the source of every value from autonomous vehicles and technology and birth control and medicine and everything else. And that's what we're here to defend on the Ayn Rand Center UK. Thank you to our super chatters. Let me just double check, make sure I didn't miss any last minute ones there. Nope, but we do have a bunch today. Do appreciate that. Again, folks, if you're listening, you appreciate these kind of conversations, you know what to do. Ayn Rand Center UK. Link is at the top of the chat. If you're listening later or on the podcast, it's Ayn Rand Center. They spell center backwards like the Brits do. Ayn Rand Center, RE at the end, .co.uk. Click, become a member, become a part of this group that is making these kinds of shows happen. Wouldn't happen without your support. We're so excited to be over 5,000 subscribers on the channel, and that is going to continue to go up because of your support. Nicolas, Mark, Jacqueline, an outstanding discussion. Thank you. Any quick thoughts before we wrap up and I talk about what's coming up next? No, I think we're good.
Nope.
What's coming up next is more of me talking. At 5 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock in the UK, whenever that is, wherever you're at, I'm going to present the 100th episode. You ARC UK supporters have made this possible. The 100th episode of my afternoon show, Life on Earth. If you thought, Robert sounds kind of optimistic, I'd like to hear a little bit more of that, you're going to hear a boatload of that at 5 o'clock. So that's coming up. We'll be back tomorrow again with the Daily Objective as well. Thank you for your support. And again, Mark, Jacqueline, Nicolas, thank you very much for an outstanding conversation. And we'll be back.
Thank you, Robert.
Cheers.